What I'm going to talk about now has to do with symbols. There's going to be a series of tapes that you're going to get of guided experiences that deal with what I'm calling the Lady of the Lake, meaning the feminine symbol for the path through which one acquires their spiritual consciousness. That is the way in which we're going to approach the metaphysical aspect of this workshop. But first, I felt it was important that I share with you some information that I've been synthesizing from videotapes, audio tapes, and my own personal experience, so that you have a deeper understanding of this thing called the feminine form, the female form, as a path towards a higher self and where it started. You know, and you're familiar with the yin and the yang symbols, so that's an ancient symbol of this kind of dark, it looks like a fish kind of shape, and white or light fish shape, and within it there is the eye of the opposite, meaning that there is a part of you that is in whatever you experience as being opposite, and that in fact no relationship can exist absent of that little piece. So there is a part of us, meaning male, that is female, otherwise we could not have a relationship to females, and there is a part of female that is male, otherwise it would be impossible for them to have a relationship with males. The form that we're talking about here, though, is a spiritual form. It's a mythological form. So this applies to women just as much as it applies to men. Women have also been conditioned not to show their feminine side. You have a feminine side also that has been repressed, that has been discouraged, that has not been welcomed. So it may even be more difficult for women to relate to this, because men just resist this, and they know the resistance. Women can suffer from the illusion that, oh yeah, I know all of this. Well, no, you don't, and be real clear that you don't. So that the form that I'm talking about is a mythological form, is a metaphor for explaining one's spiritual consciousness through the act of sexual symbols. And you should not confuse that for the actual physical female form. It has nothing to do with the actual physical female form, although there's a lot of that correlates through it, and you'll see that. So you have male and female, you have yin yang, you have sex love, you have physical metaphysical, you have hunter planter, you have men who have been taught to think sexually and to deny love. You have men who have been taught to think physically and deny metaphysical thought. You have men who have been taught to think hunter, or going after prey, tracking prey, killing. Whereas you have females who have been conditioned to deny sex and think love, which is the opposite, if you notice. You have female consciousness who have been the doorway, the gateway to one's metaphysical, one's higher spirit, and as I share this with you, you'll see the symbols of that, and to pretty much deny themselves physically. And they are not hunters, they are not killers, they are planters, they are seeds, they are growth. You need to understand that something incredible happened in the history of the evolution of our species when we shifted from hunters and killers to planters. We no longer were animal-oriented. We could plant and grow our own food, and life spurted from the earth, just the way life spurts from a woman, from a female's body, giving birth. So these things of birth and nurturing and earth are all very female, and you're seeing that coming up again now, recently. Again, we're resurrecting the female goddess form. Recently in science in the form of Gaia, Mother Earth Gaia. But that's the first time in thousands of years. It has been repressed for a long, long time. This is the first time we're seeing it, okay? Coming out again. And it's interesting that it's coming through science. rather than religion this time. You have the chakra symbols. Again, the one that people are most familiar with is the 7 chakra system, which is the Hindu system. The Buddhists have other systems with far more chakras than 7. You know from my work with you that I believe in energy centers in your elbows and your knees, and in fact one energy center which is up here above your head that's not even in your physical form, which in the results material you move to and you put into your head. So I too believe that there are more than 7, but the 7 symbolically explain or create a picture for what we're dealing with in this module the best, and that's why we're going to use that model. You have the 3 lower chakras, which are basically dealing with survival, the lowest one, which is located around the anus, which is located around the tailbone. You have the 2nd, which deals with your sexuality. You have the 3rd, which basically deals with security, emotions. It deals with that sense of oneself. You need to understand that all 3, survival, sexuality, territorial, security, my feelings about you, loving you or hating you, blah, 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 are all animal instincts. They're all animal self. And then you skip the center one, which is the heart chakra, and you go to the top 3, and you deal with the throat chakra of communication, the 3rd eye, which deals with eternity beyond space-time, your relationship to the absence of this life and seeing the world through these eyes, but seeing the whole picture. And then the top one, which deals with the opening or the gateway to one's higher self or consciousness, or in fact that other chakra that I believe is there that's above your head, that's beyond your physical form. The lower chakras of 1, 2, and 3, which are your animal chakras, your center chakra, which is your heart, and then your upper 3, which is communication, seeing the world beyond the vision or the eyes of this lifetime, and your top chakra, which is your lotus chakra, which is represented as the gateway or the opening to one's higher self. All of these come together here in the heart, and you need to understand the symbols there. So you've got these 3 animal ones, and then all of a sudden, if you look at the symbols within the organized systems of belief, the lower one, for example, is symbolized by a snake, and then there's a male-female form in the sexual one, but they're human forms. And then in the 3rd one, there's also male-female forms, but again human. And when it gets to the heart chakra, they become male, female, but golden in color. This correlates to the Christian belief of the virgin birth, because if you remember, Buddha was born symbolically from the side, listen to it, from the side of his mother. And if you look at the pictures of that, he's coming right out of here. Now obviously we know, hopefully we know that he wasn't born from the side of his mother. So he was born here, from where? From her heart chakra. And that is the birth of humanity. And that is the birth of God. That's where gods are born. Whether that was coming through the Virgin Mother, Mary in the Christian religion, or whether that's Buddha being born from his mother's side here at the heart chakra. In other words, that God that's being born is you. And it's born out of the heart chakra. It comes out of the heart chakra, and it comes out of the heart chakra when you've transcended your animal self, your animal instincts. So it's real important that you understand that that thing which we're calling sexuality, that we're dealing with on a regular basis, is in all religions' minds considered animal, considered below your spiritual movement, and therefore should be transcended. So it has been being made wrong for thousands of years, and you need to know that. You need to understand that it's been being made wrong for thousands of years, with the exception of, some small cults like Tantra and the Tao, who believe that it was also a path to one's higher self. But even they, in their final stages, encourage you to drop it and to move on, that they're a path to one's higher self. You still drop it if you notice. You never get to just hang around and enjoy it. So you have those kinds of symbols going back that far. You have the symbols or the titles of Eros, Amor, Eros meaning passion, Eros meaning sex, Amor meaning love. You have the troubadours who sang of Amor as being better than Eros, okay, in the 12th century, of being a way to achieve one's higher self, to transcend this thing called Eros, to transcend this thing called passion. You have arranged marriages still in this planet, and you have arranged marriages in the West, to less of a degree, obviously, since the 12th century, where love by choice or being together with a partner because you choose them, because you love them, has become the system of belief. That's a new belief system, and you need to know that that's a new belief system. The female form was always thought of in ancient cultures as the giver of forms. The feminine form was the giver of forms. So she was the Virgin Mother. She was Mother Earth. She was the one who created you. In other words, she knew God. She knew that aspect of consciousness that was even beyond God, because in the ancient cultures, she even created the gods. The feminine form created the gods, so the gods were given birth by her. Again, the model of Buddha being born out of his mother's, his mother's heart chakra, or Jesus Christ being born out of the Virgin Mother. You've got to get that these are gods being born where from? A female form. So the female form was synonymous with, it was the same as one's spiritual consciousness, one's higher consciousness. So you had that plus the feminine form being attached to the planting cultures, meaning that they worked agriculturally, they were symbolized as being similar to the earth, that they also were the creators of this thing called God's you. We're supposed to be gods. We're not supposed to be humans. We're supposed to be, in other words, the old mythology says that humans are gods. You see, we're animals who have transcended our animal nature and become gods in the form of humans. We are gods. It isn't that we're waiting to become gods. It isn't that we're supposed to be working on this. It's supposed to have already happened for us, according to the ancient mythology and the symbols. So love and God were the same, and therefore love has become a spiritual quality, not an animal quality, not a sexual quality, separate from. And there was therefore then a love for Mother Goddess. So the love of God becomes synonymous with the love of the goddess, the love of the feminine form, the love of the female. Then there was this patriarchal domination that came in, and it came in a lot of different ways. Again, there was the virgin birth, which was the birth of spirit from matter, the birth of compassion from the heart. But you're born from a mother. You're born from a physical form. Your physical form, my physical form, is my mother's physical form. I came from her body. I didn't come from my father's body. And that is my largest physical presence. That is my largest animal presence. That is my sexuality, is my body. And your largest sexual organ is your skin. It's not your genitals or your breasts. It's your skin. And your skin came from your mother. Your skin came from your mother. So there's this contradiction of the physical and the metaphysical coming through the feminine form, yet there is all of this physical matter, this physical reality, which is clearly feminine and not masculine. So the image of woman was once, basically in mythology, the image of the world. She represented the universe. She represented that which from everything came. Everything came from her, so she therefore represented everything. And you can see this in ancient books. You can see it in temples. You can see it all over the place. It's everywhere. It starts with, again, where did this start? The primitive planting cultures. It starts with before ancient times, even before places like Egypt. It starts with cultures that were just into planting and growing. And the women worked in those fields. And the women were the ones who did that kind of work while the men went off and hunted while this transition was taking place. So women were considered magical. Women were considered tied in with the earth. And women are clearly symbolic of that which nurtures and gives birth. Nurtures and gives birth. Those are appropriately female qualities. Those are not male qualities. So men have to work on those. Men have to really work on their nurturing nature. They're not conditioned to be that way. They have not been for thousands of years, so they have to move in that direction. They have to work at that. Women also, but women have had more symbology. They've had more symbols there that allow them to be more nurturing. They are clearly birth-giving. That doesn't mean that men cannot give birth. Men can obviously give birth to themselves, can give birth to spirituality. Most of your religious masters are men because they go on this pursuit. They understand that they're deficient in this way. There were ancient agricultural worlds, ancient Mesopotamia, primitive planting cultures, the Egyptian valley country, the Nile. The goddess was dominant in those cultures. The goddess, they were not patriarchal structures. They were not patriarchal societies. They were matriarchal societies. Her body, as I said, represented not only time, space in the universe, but beyond time, space, because she knew where the form comes from. And you just have to think about that for a moment. Where did you come from? You came from your mother, okay? Which implies that she knows where you came from. That she has a connection to something higher than you. And that's what ancient people believed, that the woman knew something that the male did not, that the woman had a relationship to that which was beyond God, to that which was what created God, that she had a relationship to something beyond there. So what was beyond her was neither male nor female. Okay, now we're getting into spirituality again. She had a spiritual connection. It's neither male nor female. In Christian text, you'll hear people talk about Jesus not being male or female, and because he embodies both male and female. She has created everything, including the gods. Okay? Now, Joseph Campbell, who is an incredible theologian and man who really has brought myth and psychology together, tells a story about the Vator Gods, which I think symbolizes this in a very simple story. And basically the gods are standing around and they're having a party and they're talking as usual. And there's the Lord of Fire and there's the Lord of Wind, and they're standing there and they're talking. And this amorphous kind of smoky kind of form comes toward them, and they see it in the distance. And one asks the other, "What is that?" And the other says, "I don't know what that is." So the Lord of Fire says, "Well, I'll go find out." And he approaches this smoky kind of presence and says, "Who are you?" And a voice comes from the smoky presence and says, "And who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm the Lord of Fire, and I can burn anything." And out of this amorphous cloud comes this little piece of straw thrown on the ground. He says, "Well, burn that." And the Lord of Fire tries to burn it and can't burn it. He's very confused. He doesn't understand what's happened to his power. And he goes back to the Lord of Wind and says, "Well, I don't know what's going on. I tried to burn this thing and I couldn't burn it." And the Lord of Wind says, "Well, I'll handle this. I'll try." And he goes over. The Lord of Wind goes over to this amorphous thing there that neither male nor female. Notice it's amorphous. It doesn't have a form. And says, "And who are you?" And he says, "And who are you?" And he says, "Well, I'm the Lord of Wind, and I can blow anything around." And he throws out a piece of straw again. This amorphous thing throws out this piece of straw again. And the Lord of Wind tries to blow it, and he can't blow it. Then some presence comes. And the presence that walks up to them is a feminine form. And her conversation implies at this point in the story that she created these two, the God, the Lord of Fire, and the Lord of Wind. And she basically says to them, "Hey, fellas, this is where you came from. This is where your power came from. And this form, he, she, or it, whatever you want to call it, can either turn your power off or turn your power on. Okay? So that the ultimate mystery of being, the ultimate mystery of our existence, as far back as the Vedas, was thought as coming through the female. And that's why you'll see so many female forms all over their temples, all over their churches, not churches, all over their temples. You'll see these feminine forms, but you'll also see feminine forms all over churches, as I'll get to in a moment. What you got to understand about this little story is that she's illuminating the gods. It's the feminine who's telling the gods, who's teaching the gods. It's not the gods who's teaching the feminine. And she's teaching them about the source of their own being. She's teaching them about where they came from. Okay? So the birth of civilization, as we know it, comes from the Near East, comes from India. And the birth of civilization comes from a part of the world, therefore, that is predominantly feminine. You have all your river valley countries. You have your rivers like the Nile, the Ganges, the Tiber Euphrates, the Indus Valley. They're all female names. Listen to the names. They're all feminine names. They are not male names at all. And this is where civilization, as we now know it, started. So it all started out of this female form as the one who could explain what was beyond our reality. And then that existed, obviously, for much longer than we could even calculate, because there were no books, there were no records or anything. At some point you start guessing. And by the way, there's some of the guessing that's real good. But then the herders came back, and they were animal herders and killers and hunters again, and they began to repress, and you begin to see in mythology warrior gods like Zeus. You begin to see symbols of death and symbols of the sword, and notice who's bringing them. Male, not female. Male is bringing these kind of symbols. And they come in and they basically wipe out the concept of the goddess, which was the predominant religious symbol or path before them. They virtually just wipe it out, and it's wiped out in another number of different ways. So the whole business of seeds, planting, fertility, you got to understand fertility is feminine, it is not male, and you want to hear that, because it's important that you hear that you understand that this thing of creation comes from the female form. Where it was most blatantly killed, the whole business of the feminine being the path to higher self, to consciousness, was in the Old Testament, was the Canaanite goddess, meaning that the Hebrews described her as the abomination. The abomination, translated, means an object of extreme hatred. And you have to understand that the Hebrews in the Old Testament literally killed the concept of the goddess. I mean, it happened in other ways, but they were the ones that were most blatant about it. You have the Indo-European belief system, which basically is, Zeus marries the goddess, but at least there you see both. You see both male and female in union together in relationship, for lack of a better term. The female form was also very potent during Hellenistic times around the Mediterranean. She was important to those cultures, but eventually was also wiped out there. She came back in the 12th and 13th centuries, strangely enough, with the Roman Catholics. You wouldn't think this, given what some of their current policies are, but there it is. It's there in their doctrine. It's there in the form of the Virgin Mother. It's there in terms of Mary, Mother of God. It's there in terms of the symbol of the Madonna and the child sitting on the Madonna's lap. So again, there it is. You've got this virgin who was begetted by what? Not a man, spirit. The one who's having sex with the virgin is God, is spirit, and out comes Jesus, you see? And it's the same thing as Buddha being born from the side of his mother. It's no different from the heart chakra. It's the same symbology. And by the way, it goes all the way back to the antiquity, to the Egyptians also. So you have it coming back through Christianity, and the virgin birth comes via the New Testament, and it comes via Luke, there's 4 versions of the Bible, but Luke is the only one, who has the virgin birth in it. Now, why is that? Luke was a Greek, and again, the virgin birth, the female form was Hellenistic. It was Mediterranean. The feminine form was very predominant in that part of the world. The virgin birth, again, in India is there, and it's there in the form of the heart chakra. You've got the 3 lower animal chakras: survival, sex, security, emotion, etc. Territorial, you've got the heart chakra, the opening of the heart. And once you reach the opening of the heart, notice when you get to the 4th chakra, what opens? Your spirituality. Okay? It's virgin birth again, in the form of the chakra system. So you see it in the Indian, or predominantly the Hindu approach. You see it in the Buddhist approach, through Buddha being born through the side of his mother. You see it through the Christian approach, or the virgin birth, coming through virginity. Understand that this is virgin. This is not a human birth. This is not a man begetting a woman. This is spirit begetting a virgin. And according to Christian doctrine, her virginity is even restored after the birth, okay? She gets it back. Okay, so they make a real point of making this real clear to you that this was not a physical sexual act. This was a spiritual act. And the symbols go back even further. They go back to antiquity. They go back to the Madonna in the business of Egyptian times, of Isis, who gave birth to a son, Horus. And what's incredible about that is that she is a heroine in this myth, where she chases her dead husband and conceives with her dead husband, who has been buried in a column in a temple, and I won't go through the whole story, but I mean, she conceives of a child from her dead husband, okay? But what's interesting here is that you have a female who's the heroine. You have a female who goes and who finds her dead husband, and who conceives of a child through her dead husband. And if you see the pharaoh in all Egyptian things, they usually are sitting on a throne. Well, if you know anything about Egypt, that throne represents Isis. The throne that the pharaoh sits on is feminine. The throne is feminine. That's the source of his power. And then you go to the west wing of the cathedral in Chartres, and you see Jesus, the world emperor, sitting where? On the lap of the Madonna. Feminine. Emperor of the world sitting on the lap of the Madonna. So you have these symbols going all the way back to antiquity, up until present time. And by the way, the Christians are not, well, I'm not saying that everyone knows this, but Christian doctrine says, literally, that they took these symbols. There's a direct quote from Peter that says, "Those forms which were merely mythological in the past are now incarnate and actual in our Savior." So in other words, they don't try to hide the fact that they took the symbols from mythology. What they do take credit for is bringing life to them, which, by the way, they probably did. So it's not like they snuck around and did this. They did this very obviously. They did this very clearly, and you need to see that. So it's the death of the animal nature to the birth of your spiritual nature, and it comes through the feminine. It comes about by the way of the goddess, who I call the Lady of the Lake, which we will be doing these meditations about, which we'll be handling in the form of guided visualizations and meeting her and touching her qualities. Okay? Now, how do you see that? You see that in 12th and 13th century cathedrals throughout France. What are they called? Notre Dame de Chartres, Notre Dame de Paris, through Mother Church. So every time you walk into a church, and every time you walk out, supposedly, you have gone through the feminine, through Notre Dame, and you have been transformed into your higher self. And that's what those names mean. That's what those symbols mean. They mean through the mother, through the female, through the feminine form. So despite all the bad rapping that Christianity gets, they've got some very definite symbols there about adoring the feminine form. But the feminine form as spiritual, not as physical. They're terrible to women, physical, you know, or at least it appears that way, and that they don't allow them to become priests, etc., so forth and so on. But that's only certain parts of Christianity. There are Christian ministers who are women in many other forms of Christianity. It's only certain forms where they hold that doctrine. But in ancient times, they were very, and in Middle Ages, they were very clear. So that Middle Age belief system then ties into the tapes which you've received about Tristan and Isolde, because that's when the troubadours were around, and that was the Middle Ages. And that was, the troubadours believed that basically love transcended lust. So when you've got lust, meaning sex over here, and you want your lover to love you, well, loving you means that they have to transcend lust, because love is synonymous with God, and God doesn't have sex for the purpose of producing physical pleasure, or even babies for that matter. God only has sex for producing other gods. And they're virgin births. They don't occur, they come from within, they don't come from without, you see? So the troubadours then began to preach of romantic love, and when you listen to the tapes, you'll hear that what they did was literally excite their passion. They never entered into a sex act. The act was that a knight would court, it was courtly love, a knight would court a lady, but would not have sex with her. In other words, they would drive up their passionate urges, they would excite themselves to the point of almost insanity, but they would not do anything. They would not have sex. So the troubadours sang of this and sang songs about it, okay? And what this did was it created basically the whole Western consciousness about individual choices, about men and women making individual choices about who they were going to be in a relationship with, which had before that been determined by church and state and family. That's who determined who you were going to be married to. So before that, marriage was separate from sex. In other words, you could be married to somebody, have a family, have that kind of love, which, by the way, is a very beautiful kind of love, but you also had lovers. You also had what we call lovers. You had sexual partners. Notice they didn't call them lovers. They had other names for them, mistresses, concubines, etc. That was separate and was not a threat to the relationship. Now, we have taken that and reversed that. We've taken the troubadour concept of love, and we've made it romantic love, which is an ideal higher than marriage, because marriage was determined by church and state, and a choice and an opening, a gateway to one's spiritual self. Many people on this planet, in the West especially, choose a romantic relationship as their pathway to their higher self rather than an organized system of belief or religion. So many people have dropped their religious and spiritual beliefs and moved their consciousness toward a romantic relationship to find those feelings of feeling great, feeling loved, feeling spiritual, feeling whole, feeling complete. They've chosen that as their path rather than religion. Now, when you do that, when you enter into romantic relationship for the purpose of satisfying spiritual needs, you're going to have some difficulties with your sexual relationship with that person, you know, if you're trying to get the same thing from the same person. Notice the troubadours did not do that. They did not have sex with them. They would pique themselves to passionate excitement, but they would not have sex, okay? That would be a break in the vow. That would be to distort it. So the traditions of church were dropped. We dropped them in favor of this new approach called romantic love. So what we call love began with the 12th century troubadours, romantic love, And love is a person-to-person relationship. Romantic love is love of one person loving another person. It was the ideal and still is our ideal today. And if you don't believe me, just check your own value systems. Check what you would want more. Whether you would want a solid romantic relationship that lasted forever, or whether you would want some spiritual path that lasts forever. See which one your consciousness says that you really have been conditioned to believe will work for you. And you'll understand. Now, before the 12th century, love was eros. Love was God who excites your sexual desire. In other words, there was a spiritual quality to it, but it was a sexual quality. And this is the erotic sexual urge. This is not a person-to-person relationship. This is a sexual organ-to-organ relationship, okay? It doesn't involve consciousness. It involves satisfying sexual needs. Eros is symbolized in the West as Cupid. Cupid is this little cherub that runs around with the bow and arrow. You see him on Valentine's cards, and he shoots these arrows, and everybody falls in love, and, and everything works out great, okay? That came from Eros. Now, Eros was the mythological form. Now, strangely enough, in the East, not in the West, Eros is called Kama. And Kama is not a chubby little Cupid. Kama is, in India especially, is this kind of, he's a teenage young boy, and he's almost a man, in other words. He's not a little cherub flying around. And he's got bow and arrows, and he's got lots of, each of his arrows mean something. And there's lots of pleasurable arrows in there. But he also has arrows that symbolize agony. He has arrows that symbolize death-bringing. He has arrows that symbolize being open to pain and suffering. So the beginning is ancient, that this kind of passionate sexual involvement, this deep intimacy, involves pain and suffering. And that as strong as the intimacy is as high as the pain is. So that belief system started early. There's another form of non-person-to-person love that we call agape in Christian tradition, which is to love thy neighbor, to love thy enemy. That's not really important for this discussion. It's just so that you know that there is another form, which there's the sexual form, there's love thy neighbor, and then there's this business called romantic love, the business of choosing a partner. Okay? The romantic love of the 12th and 13th century was an ideal to be lived for. You lived for it the way you live for a religion, the way you live for a country in politics, etc. It wasn't something that you just put aside. And it was very clearly a rebellion against the organized systems which existed at that time. And those organized systems were basically that you took pubescent girls and either the church, family, or the state decided who the heck that they were going to marry. So an arranged marriage had love, as it still does today, but the love is different. It's a love of family, it's a love of companionship, it's a love of children, it's a love of belonging. I know that when I got divorced, it was a long time ago, it's 18 years ago, 16 years ago. The thing I missed most when I was trying to identify what I missed when Christine and I separated physically, when we moved, I missed my family. And I kept saying that to people. They kept saying, well, what do you miss? I kept saying, I miss my family. I miss the feeling of belonging. I miss the feeling of someone being there. No, I didn't miss the conversation. No, I didn't miss the sexuality. No, I didn't miss any of that stuff. I missed belonging to something. I miss being part of something. So there's that kind of love, and for that it is valuable. But do not confuse that with eros. Do not confuse that with passion. Do not confuse that with sexuality. So a person-to-person marriage in those days, in other words, to do what we are doing now, in those days was dangerous. And it was dangerous because it was heresy, it was adultery, and was punishable by death. You could literally be killed for choosing a partner and having sex with them. The classic myth about this is Tristan and Isolde, which you have the tape of. And in that tape, you'll hear Tristan say, when Soul's nurse says to him, do you realize that you've drunk a potion, a passion, that will cause you, it's your death, basically, is what she was saying to him. And he said, by my death, do you mean the agony that I will experience in this love? That I accept. And if you mean by my death, the punishment that we will get if we are found out, meaning that they were having an affair, because, you see, Tristan was sent by King Mark to get Isolde. Isolde was supposed to marry the king, and he was sent to get her, and he had sex with her instead. So he said, do you mean by punishment that I'll be killed? I accept that. But here's the kicker. Here's the kicker in it. He says, and then he says, but if you mean that I will burn in hell for eternity for the love that I feel, I accept that. Now that's heavy stuff, because in those days they believed in a literal hell. In those days they believed that you really went to a place and you burnt for eternity. Okay? So therein lies the choice of pain, that this love is greater than life, greater than any pain that I can bear. That's the myth of Tristan and Isolde, and that's the one that all romantic relationship is based on in the West, and that's the root that you've got to get in touch with and see if you really want to buy into such a belief system, because the level of pain which you will experience in your romantic relationships, obviously. And if you think that how you're not around, there's a message there. You see, if I'm miserable when they're not around, if that means I love them, that's an interesting way to measure. That's an interesting ruler to use. Pain. What you're using is pain. Pain is the way in which you then measure love. So you want to examine that, and you want to know that you didn't make this up. This isn't your idea. This has been going on for a long time. And it was held up as the ideal. The troubadours sung and heralded and embraced suffering and pain in the name of love, okay? So this myth basically created a social system in the West. It's become, as I said, the ideal of the West, and the troubadours, as I said, celebrated agony. They were into agony. They were into suffering. This is basically the choice of romantic love over the laws of church and state. So what you're basically doing here is you're competing. As Campbell says, it's libido over credo, which I like. So credo is God's laws. They're the disobeying, it's the obeying of God's laws. It's the obeying of those things. And if you disobey God's laws, which of course are right because they're God's laws, you're a sinner. And by doing that, you jeopardize your eternal spirit. You jeopardize your eternity. You jeopardize that aspect of yourself which is spirit. Libido is this impulse to life, okay? You can look at it in a positive way. You don't have to think about sex and libido and sexuality as being negative. It's this impulse to life that comes from the heart, which is the organ basically of what? Of love, of opening up to what? To another human being. That's what it is. So when you hold that to be true as the troubadour ethic, and you say, yeah, that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for the heart that opens me up to another human being. In those days, and in many cases today, you're going against what you've been conditioned to believe is your spirit. You're going against what you've been conditioned to believe is your spirituality. This is basic to the West. You don't see it a lot in the East. It's there, but not like we have it here. That you trust your experience rather than what was mouthed to you by others. Okay? That's what honorable sexuality is. Honorable sexuality is doing what you trust as your experience rather than what other people are telling you to do. Okay? It's the authentic life does not come from following the dictates of the popular consensus. Authentic life comes from following your own nature. And your own nature is that you are on some level animal. You are on some level an animal who has sexual desires, sexual needs. So the troubadour idea of romantic love was perpetuated as something superior to marriage, that you shouldn't be married. Now you want to just see if that's existing in your life. If you're saying, yeah, marriage is boring, and what I really want to do is run out and fall in love every week, well, guess what? You're a troubadour and you don't even know it. And you need a horse and a coat of armor and a lance, and you can start charging along, screaming amour like they did, you see? Yeah. That was their war cry, amour, you know? And when you feel that way next time in a discotheque or in a pub, like you're standing there, amour, well, you kind of know where the hell it came from. It's not just you feeling that way. You've been programmed to think this way. They believe that suffering awakens the heart. Listen to that one. Okay? And that the way that one suffers to awaken this heart is through what? Through love. Through romantic love. This is the easiest way. And guess what? That's been my experience. If I really want to suffer, I just get real deeply involved in a romantic relationship and wait for it to reverse. And then I've got it, you see? And there it is. You see, and it comes back and you say, yeah, I expected that. And that's exactly why it happens. It's exactly why it happens, because you expected it. Because you expected that to happen. Because that was the belief system that was perpetuated by them. So it's more than love. It's filled with expectations, impossible demands, beliefs that maybe you don't agree with, and it's filled with an incredible amount of pain, and it's really up to you to get clear about all of that. And the reason that I've shared all of this stuff with you is that you understand that this is not an accident. This is a methodical plan. It's as if you've been being brainwashed for thousands of years so that your confusion is appropriate. Stop beating yourself up for it. What you need to do is educate yourself. What you need to do is listen to the tapes that I've given you, listen to this information, ask questions and find out about it, and follow your nature. Follow what feels right for you rather than being a troubadour or being a Hindu or being a whatever, a Christian, whatever it is. Get clear about what it is for you in regards to your sexuality.
This is the end of side A of this cassette. The guided visualization follows on side B.